Hey everyone, thank you for those who have joined in. Very good morning or good afternoon, based upon where you're joining from. Glad to have you all here. A quick introduction about myself and my colleagues. So, I'm Alicia Mittal, I'm a vice president with Everest Group. I lead our research on application services as well as digital services. And within digital, our key focus area is the whole of consulting and advisory space, which we are seeing shape up very, very differently, very rapidly over the last couple of years. So, very excited to be part of this conversation and sharing some of our thoughts with all of you. Parul?
Thanks, Alicia. Hi, everyone. Glad to be here. My name is Parul Trivedi. I'm a practice director with Everest Group. Like Alicia said, I have been tracking the market around consulting for quite some time now. And with advent of AI, there is so much happening and we are very excited to talk about it. We are going to talk about systems of execution and how is it going to shape up the consulting industry. Looking forward to discuss more.
All right, great. So, let me first set a quick context and agenda for what we are going to discuss today. So, I think we are all past that stage and we all agree that we don't question the value of AI anymore. We all know AI is here to stay. We all know it's reshaping the way we work, we interact with customers, we run our businesses, etc. In a way, it's reshaping the whole operating model for enterprises for the good. And to address this demand of organizations for more agility, resilience, hyper efficiency in everything, organizations are finding that their existing systems aren't sufficient enough and they're turning to what we are calling as systems of execution. We'll talk more about what systems of execution is and what really it entails for an organization to adopt this model, which is really AI powered, intelligent, autonomous systems in their organization. But our main focus for the conversation today would be we want to discuss how this systems of execution is redefining enterprise operations and thereby almost catalyzing a transformation in the consulting industry as well. There are a lot of changes that it is pushing the consulting industry to undertake, both from an opportunity standpoint as well as a need to be able to address this market standpoint. So, at a high level, we'll start first, we'll quickly touch upon what SOE systems of execution is about. What are some of the challenges as enterprises think about adopting SOE and think about investing in SOE and building that autonomous systems? And that's where the opportunity for consulting providers comes in. How are they suited to help organizations navigate some of the challenges in this journey to systems of execution adoption? And finally, we'll talk about what some of these opportunities are and what kind of changes consulting firms needs to make and undertake in their offerings and their proposition to capture these opportunities. So that in a nutshell is the agenda for today. And to begin with, as I said, let's quickly touch upon what really is this systems of execution. So Parul, why don't you talk about quickly what is systems of execution and what does it really mean for organizations?
Yeah, so let's start with understanding what systems of execution is. If I have to put it very simply in just one line, systems of executions are the systems that execute business processes autonomously, and autonomously being the key word here. To understand systems of execution in more detail, right, it helps to understand how the enterprise IT has evolved over last few decades. So we typically operated with two main systems in the past in the enterprises, right? The first being the systems of record. So think of your ERPs, CRMs, right? These are your fantastic databases that stored and managed all the data in the organizations. And they have been the backbones of the enterprises. Then came the systems of engagements. So these are your portals, mobile apps, dashboards that allowed user interaction, transactions, etc. And they made the data in the system of records accessible and usable to clients, customers, etc. Right? But both of these systems have been fundamentally very reactive. So they would generate the insights, they would generate the dashboards, but then again, they rely on somebody, either a human or an agent, to interpret that information and then take action based on that. Right? So, what we realize is that both of these systems are very insufficient in today's age of agility and efficiency. And this is where systems of execution come in, right? So, it represents a third architectural layer. So these are intelligent systems that don't just house the data or provide access to it, they actually execute work, right? They ingest information from both systems of engagement, system of record, and then use AI agents to drive processes, and typically without human intervention. The key idea in building a system of execution is that rather than beginning with, say, a tool or a platform, you have to reimagine the process top down. So processes are at the center of system of execution. And it's not about improving how humans currently perform a task. It's actually about asking, if AI were at the center of this code process, how would we design it from the scratch? So this is what a systems of execution is. And I talked about a lot of terms and jargon. So let me try to make it more tangible for our audience, right? So let's take a common process. Let's say if you are applying for a small business loan. So how would that process be before systems of execution? You will go to a bank, fill out an application form, or on the bank's website, you will fill that form, right? Which is your system of engagement. And then that data gets saved to bank's CRM, which is your system of record. Now you wait for somebody, say like a loan officer, to check those details, check your credit scores, etc., etc. Now this whole process might take days or even sometimes weeks, right? It's expensive for the bank, it's frustrating for the customer. So there are a lot of inefficiencies in that process. Now enter systems of execution, right? So let's reimagine this process if it was being taken over by a systems of execution at its core. So the moment the customer submits that application form on the website, the system of execution kicks in. The first step for the system of execution would be to activate that data. So, right, it will take the data from different sources. So, for example, it will get the data of credit score from credit bureau. It will check the CRM of the bank and get that data through our data fabric, and it will get all the data about that customer. The second step would be to take the decision. Now that it has all that data, it would check what are the different rules by the bank, what are the different risk models, whether this person is applicable for getting that loan or not, right? So he'll check, hey, is that person meeting the threshold criteria for the credit? And based on that, it will decide whether to approve the loan or deny the loan. The third process is then orchestrating the process, which I think is the most important one, which is the execution part of it. So based on whether the loan is approved or denied, it will automatically regenerate a loan agreement. It will send it out for signing, and once signed, it will also trigger the fund disbursement, right? So overall, the process that took like a week or so is now being done in few minutes. I would also want to highlight one very important part, which is around security, risk, and compliance. Now, since this whole process is being done by AI agents, it's very important to ensure that the risk and the security element is also baked in. So, through these three or four steps, the example that I took, this is how a systems of execution would work in real life. And this is not something that's just theoretical. As you see on the slide, there are many examples of organizations that have been doing it. So, for example, if I talk about Amazon's logistic, right, the fulfillment centers. So it just doesn't show you the package's location, right? It automatically and autonomously routes millions of items to achieve same day shipping. And this is not just some incremental improvement, right? It's a fundamental change in how work gets done. It's complete rethinking of the enterprise operating model. So now we know what SOE is. But the natural question is, why isn't everybody doing it already, right? If it's so powerful, what's holding the enterprises back? And Alicia, do you have an answer for that?
Yes, absolutely. And I think you touched upon a lot of things, a lot of initiatives, activities, investments that organizations will need to do, reimagining the process, rethinking their structure, all of that. The the problem where the problem that enterprises face is that they are trying to not touch the core and not disturb the core and overlay systems of execution concept on top of this current systems and talent and everything they have. What results in is this image, I think, shows it very nicely. It's almost like driving a Ferrari in Delhi traffic. And of course, this picture doesn't show a lot of potholes, which is unavoidable on the Indian roads. So you can't drive it efficiently if you are still doing it in the same old manner, if you're not rethinking about how your how your processes needs to change, how your technology foundation needs to change, what skills you need and what skills you need to change to be able to address the newer workflows and to be able to engage people in as per the newer workforce. You're not doing enough, or you're not being true to the systems of execution concept. And then of course there's the data debt. So in a sense, what we say is PTSD, process, tech, skills, and data. These are the three main debts that we believe organizations need to cater to, need to address to be able to achieve the right kind of outcomes that they need, to be able to achieve the right kind of objectives that they are aiming for as part of SOE. Now, one of the if I just have to break it down further, what that means is in terms of strategy support that they will need. The whole enterprise strategy needs to be redesigned in terms of the new operating model for agentic execution. The second is really about the process reimagination, as you mentioned, Parul, about redesigning workflows for intelligent orchestration and automation, rethinking which systems, which processes can work more efficiently with an AI based model, and so on and so forth. The tech is really about architecting and integrating an SOE layer across legacy systems. Skills is about talent, workforce transformation, change management as well, because ultimately the way in which people used to work has shifted meaningfully. So it requires reskilling, reorganizing workforce around that human plus AI collaboration, digital and human workforce, and then embedding human oversight, as you mentioned, about various risks and cybersecurity issues, compliances, regulations. There needs to be a lot of governance mechanism around it. And finally, data, which is about having that AI readiness in the data estate, which is essentially the foundation and the starting point for SOE to work, building a unified real time data fabric for undertaking some of these dynamic decisions. All of these are some of the baggages that organizations are carrying since long. And until and unless these issues are solved for, until and unless organizations tackle these issues head on, it's very difficult for them to be able to achieve the right kind of outcomes that they've been hoping from an SOE architecture. Now, so Parul, so far we've talked about what SOE is, what are the challenges. Of course, it's not an incremental change, but it's a transformation that organizations can potentially drive in their business using AI, Gen AI, agentic AI, everything. The question now is, what does it mean for consulting providers? Where do, in this entire puzzle and this entire journey of transformation, do consulting providers fit in, and what's their role in this whole journey?
Yeah, very important question. And I think we have come to the heart of the conversation today. So, Alicia, you talked about the PTSD, the core problem that the enterprises face, and how the enterprises have been consuming consulting services has also changed. So, think of, say, last decade or some time before that, if there was a problem in the revenue, the enterprises would call somebody from, say, a strategy consultant teams that, hey, I have a problem in my profitability. And then that particular strategy consultant would take care of that. If they had a problem in the technology landscape, maybe somebody from the technology consulting team would come. But what we have realized is that now technology is at the heart of the business, right? And all the problems are now cross functional. It's not that you can only solve something around business without actually talking about technology, right? So things have become cross functional, they need real time autonomous execution. So there's no clear distinction between business, technology, and risk these days. And that's what is evident in how consulting providers are also going to the market, right? Some of them have already started on it, but most of them are still thinking what they need to do with their operating model. So the first step that I think that needs to be done, or the first change, the first big change, is that consulting organizations need to embed AI right from strategy to execution, right? And it cannot be a separate work stream. It needs to be a thread that's woven through the entire engagement, whether it's a strategy engagement, tech engagement, ops, or anything else, right? So AI needs to be at the core of it. And the second thing is to reimagine all the processes across data, tech, and talent, right? And this is the direct antidote to the PTSD framework that you mentioned, Alicia, right? You cannot solve a client's process debt without simultaneously addressing their data debt, right? Without modernizing their data, without modernizing their technology landscape, and upskilling to close their skill debt, right? And what this requires is a holistic, integrated team that cuts across all these dimensions. And finally, the risk aspect, which is, again, I think one of the critical aspects in adoption of AI by enterprises, also, right? The best in class peers that we are seeing, they have guardrails around this automated governance and real time risk control so that they can help those enterprises gain that confidence to actually achieve that value from AI. And this is not something that's just theoretical. In fact, recently we saw how Accenture changed their positioning in the market with a complete umbrella of free invention services across their 5 and 6 service lines, right? So this is something that has already started happening, and some of the leading service providers are already taking a lead on that. So I talked about the operating model of consulting, but then the offerings will also change, right? If I talk about strategic advisory, so till now, the consulting providers were thought of somebody that are providing just PPTs, but it's not the expectation anymore. You need to build things, you need to help execute things, right? And there are many examples in the market of how this is also changing. So if I talk about BCG, right? They have transformed their model through BCGX. They are now a co-creation engine, right? That actively builds orchestration capabilities for the client. When I talk about process and ops transformation, it's more about dynamic AI driven workflows now, right? And again, if I take an example of, say, somebody like Fractal Analytics, they have built their entire business on the principles that they just don't consult on supply chain processes now. They use their platform to use, use predictive intelligence into it. So, the kind of offerings that service providers are taking to the market, the consulting providers are taking to the market, that has also seen a shift, and this is across process, tech enablement, risk, everything. So in a nutshell, Alicia, if I want to summarize it, that the service providers, the consulting providers, they need to have an integrated approach to consulting. They cannot just take siloed strategic advisory or tech advisory to the market. They need to have AI weaving across all of this. And again, the next logical question that comes is, okay, we understood about the offerings, but which are the areas where the changes are going to happen? So are there any specific areas where we are seeing more activity, Alicia?
Yeah, absolutely there are, because ultimately when we think about systems of execution, while we may be so far talking about a whole transformation, in reality, in practicality, it has to happen by different functions or in pockets of
Yes.
organization. And particularly, we are seeing areas which are very data rich or which require very intensive decision making at a rapid pace. Those to be the most suited areas for consulting providers to focus on when it comes to opportunities, shaping the opportunities, and helping organizations transform to what we call systems of execution. So some of the areas that come to my mind, with the current macroeconomic situations as well, the geopolitical disruptions across the world, the supply chain and fulfillment is one key area. The entire inventory orchestration, route optimization, automated restocking, etc. And I think this is something that Amazon has actually already done and delivered, and it's actually doing it in a lot of areas, because of which its delivery cycle has been extremely rapid in terms of either the same day or 2 hours shipping post an order placement. So that, for example, this end-to-end fulfillment system is one of the very prominent use cases where we see this systems of execution to have immense amount of impact. The second thing we see is around finance and risk areas, real time closing, autonomous reconciliation, fraud prevention. All of these again are very data intensive, rapid decision making that organizations needs to undertake. And that again, SOE concept fits in very well with AI taking a lot of the actions and not waiting for a human intervention based upon the knowledge that system has shared. The other areas could also be around healthcare operations, for example, preemptive care planning or AI led clinical triaging, or think about customer experience and AI based support resolution. I think again, customer support function is an area where we are seeing already a lot of adoption of AI and Gen AI. And with agentic AI, rethinking about the entire way in which customer support is delivered, that's another very high potential, almost like a low hanging fruit for a lot of organizations to invest in and get more efficiencies. So those are certain areas. And as you said, Parul, what it really requires is from a consulting provider, not just additional offerings on top of what they do, but weaving together different offerings. Because when we think about systems of execution, it's not just about a technology change, but it's really about rethinking the way that process works, rethinking the tools, the people, the entire mechanism of that entire process end to end. So, reorienting their offerings to tech and business together. And in fact, you stated the example of Accenture. I think some of the recent reorganizations that we have seen in other big four firms as well are also in the same lines, because a lot of HR related transformation engagements or finance transformation, a lot of them have been recategorized under technology transformation, because at the core, a lot of the demand that's coming in for consulting is has that common element of technology and AI led transformation. And therefore, most of the consulting providers are realizing that it's very important to have that layer of technology on top of each and every business function. So it's essentially IT plus BP together that they are going to market with, to have a much clearer proposition. What that also means is changes in talent, changes in the modus operandi in terms of what they take to market. Should it continue to be a human only way of delivery that has already been a traditional way of engagement, or should it be a human plus assets engagement? So why don't you put together all of this, Parul? I think some of the key takeaways that we have on the slide here would be helpful to just summarize what does it really mean from changes for a consulting provider, that some of which we are already seeing, some of which we are hoping to see in near future.
Yes, I think this summarizes our discussion, Arisha. So the first, and I think the one of the important areas that we are seeing is that service providers and consulting providers, they have been using assets and toolkits and IP to not just advise and consult, but also build and help enterprises take actionable real-time solutions, right? So reducing that time to the market, right? And not just providing solutions that are on the paper, but helping them actually achieve ROI from that solutions. This is the first takeaway for the consulting organizations. The second, again, is being more industry specific when they take their systems of execution playbooks to the market, right? And it doesn't only include the industry expertise, but also the domain and functional expertise. So, like we talked about, interweaving not just industry, but again, the domain, the people aspect, the analytics, everything needs to come together in those playbooks that they are taking to the market. Finally, talking about the talent part, right? So we have seen about the talent pools, the hybrid talent pools, the onshoring and offshoring models coming together, what we also talk about having not just depth in one topic, but having a horizontal view of different topics, but then depth in few topics, right? So having not just knowledge of, say, strategic advisory, but also having an understanding of technical expertise, also having some understanding of the domain. So the consultants need to have an all-rounded expertise to help enterprises move forward in this AI era. And last but not the least, risk and ethical oversight becomes very important. So the whole conversation around governance, responsible AI, easing the fears of enterprises when it comes to adopting AI, easing their security concerns about it. I think that will become very, very important. And having that complete view of how you can ease all those fears for enterprises becomes very important. So I think these are some of the key takeaways. The last thing is around ecosystem. So you cannot do it alone, right? You need to have strategic alliances. And I think this is something that many consulting organizations already do. But then again, thinking of some of the areas which are not typically done by some of these organizations, right? So having those niche specialized partners also becomes very, very important. So, in a nutshell, these are some of the areas to think about from the consulting provider's perspective. So, this brings us to the end of the presentation today. I'll hand it over to Alicia to talk more about the CT and other things.
So, just to wrap it up, thank you all for joining. The last thing we'd like to mention is we have an offer for anyone who has joined this conversation. To you could request a complimentary download of report which is on the same topic, systems of execution and the consulting opportunity. You can click on the link in the chat here to get your copy of this report. And I hope this conversation was helpful. This is just a starting, we've just scratched the surface in terms of where we see opportunities for consulting providers to be when we think about this entire transformation that organizations are undertaking with agentic AI and Gen AI powered solutions. We'd love to talk more about it. Feel free to reach out to any of us and exchange your thoughts and perspectives. Thank you so much. Have a good rest of the day ahead.
Thank you.